Ada McCrae stood dripping in the doorway of the forge, while thunder split the sky behind her, and the blacksmith turned with a piece of red iron still gripped in his tongs. She had not meant to come here. She had meant to reach the hotel before the storm broke, before anyone in Dust Hollow could ask why a woman traveling alone carried so little and looked over her shoulder so often. But the rain had come early and hard, and his forge was the only light between the edge of town and the false safety of a rented room. Silas Rourke did not move toward her. He set the iron back on the coals with careful precision, his shoulders tight beneath the canvas coat. Dust Hollow knew two things about Silas Rourke. He was the best smith in 3 counties, and he had ridden with men the law still wanted. Ada pulled the shawl tighter and met his eyes across the small space. He had the kind of face that had seen something break and never quite mended, all hard lines and guarded stillness. She knew that look. She wore it herself. Rain hammered the tin roof and poured through the gap above the double doors. He wiped his hands on a rag and finally spoke. "You are the new keeper at the Crescent Hotel." His voice was low, roughened by smoke and years of careful quiet. She nodded. "I am. Started 2 weeks ago." He stepped closer. Not far, just enough that the forge light caught the angles of his jaw. "Storm caught you." She heard no question in it, only flat observation. "It did." He gestured to a rough wooden chair near the far wall, away from the forge heat. "Sit if you want. It will not let up soon." She hesitated, then crossed the space and set her bag down beside the chair. The little leather case held everything she owned that mattered, which was not much. 3 dresses, a small painted tin with her mother's wedding ring, and a train ticket stub she should have burned a month ago. Silas returned to the forge and pulled the iron free, hammering it with short, controlled strikes. Sparks jumped and faded. She watched his hands. They were large and scarred, but he worked with a blacksmith's precision, each blow landing exactly where he intended. He did not look at her, but she felt his awareness like a hand pressed to her spine. The rain slowed to a heavy drumbeat. Ada tried to think of something ordinary to say, something a hotel keeper might say to a tradesman in a town she barely knew. But ordinary had left her vocabulary the day she walked away from Philadelphia, with a name that was not hers and a past she could not explain. "Why did you come to Dust Hollow?" he asked without looking up. The question landed harder than the hammer. She kept her voice even. "The hotel needed a keeper. I needed work." He plunged the iron into the water barrel and steam hissed up in a white cloud. "That is not an answer." She felt her spine stiffen. "It is the only one you will get." He turned then, and his eyes were pale gray, storm-colored, unreadable. "Fair enough." She stood, reaching for her bag. "I should go. The rain has eased." His hand shot out, not touching her, just raised between them. "The bridge is out." She stared at him. "What bridge?" "The one between here and the hotel." Creek rose fast. "You will have to wait until morning, or go the long way around through the gully, and that is worse in the mud." Her stomach tightened. "I cannot stay here all night." He shrugged, already turning back to the forge. "I did not ask you to, but if you try that gully in the dark, you will break your neck, and I am not fool enough to follow you." She wanted to argue. She wanted to walk out into the rain and prove she did not need his warning or his rough hospitality. but she had been running long enough to know the difference between pride and suicide. She sat back down. He pulled a dented coffee pot from a shelf and set it near the coals. After a long silence, he poured 2 tin cups and handed her one. The coffee was bitter and strong, and she wrapped both hands around the cup for the warmth. They did not speak. Outside, the storm settled into a steady roar. An hour passed. Then another. Silas worked in silence, shaping a hinge plate with steady hammer blows that rang like a slow heartbeat. Ada watched the rain and thought about the letter hidden in the bottom of her travel bag. The letter that had come 3 days ago, forwarded twice, addressed to a name she no longer used. He found you. 2 words in a hand she knew too well. She had burned the envelope, but kept the message, because forgetting danger had never kept anyone safe. Silas set the hammer down and rolled his shoulders. You are afraid of something. She jerked her gaze to him. Excuse me. He leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. You have been watching that door like you expect someone to walk through it with a gun. I am careful. That is all. He studied her for a long moment. I know the difference. She stood, the chair scraping loud against the packed dirt floor. You do not know anything about me. He did not flinch. True. But I know what running looks like. Her pulse hammered in her throat. She should leave. She should walk out into the rain and the mud and take her chances with the gully. Because this man saw too much, and she could not afford to be seen. But her legs would not move, and his eyes stayed on hers. Not unkind, just relentless. Who are you running from? He asked quietly. She lifted her chin. Who did you ride with? His expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Touché. They stood in the tense silence, the forge crackling between them. Finally, Silas turned and pulled a folded wool blanket from a shelf. You can sleep near the wall. I will stay by the forge. I do not need your blanket. He tossed it onto the chair. Take it anyway. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to throw his rough courtesy back at him and prove she did not need anything from anyone. But the night was cold and long, and pride was a poor substitute for warmth. She took the blanket. Thank you. He nodded once and returned to the forge. She wrapped herself in the scratchy wool and curled into the chair, her bag tucked against her ribs. Sleep did not come easy. She listened to the rain and the soft scrape of Silas moving around the forge, and she wondered what kind of man offered shelter to a stranger without asking for payment or explanation. A fool. Maybe. Or someone who understood that some debts could not be named. When Ada woke, gray dawn light leaked through the gaps in the walls, and the rain had stopped. Silas stood at the open door, his back to her, one hand braced on the frame. She sat up slowly, folding the blanket. He turned. Creek is down. You can cross now. She stood and picked up her bag. Thank you for the shelter. He stepped aside to let her pass. Ada. She stopped in the doorway, surprised he knew her name. Be careful, he said. This town is smaller than it looks. She did not ask what he meant. She already knew. Dust Hollow was the kind of place where secrets had a short life and a hard death, and she had brought too many of both. She walked out into the mud and morning light and did not look back. The Crescent Hotel sat at the center of Dust Hollow, like a respectable widow at a dance. 2 stories of whitewashed wood with green shutters and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Ada climbed the steps and let herself in through the side door that led to her private quarters. The hotel had 6 guest rooms upstairs, a dining room that served breakfast and supper, and a small lobby with a desk where she checked arrivals and kept the books. It was decent work. It was enough to live on, and it kept her hands busy, which kept her mind from circling back to Philadelphia and the man who thought he still owned her future. She changed into a fresh dress, dark gray cotton with a white collar, and pinned her hair back tighter. By the time she came down to start the breakfast service, 3 of the guest rooms were occupied, and the dining room smelled like coffee and frying bacon. The cook, a sharp-eyed woman named Mary Talbot, looked up from the stove. "You look like you spent the night in a barn." "Close enough," Ada said. She poured herself coffee and carried it to the front desk. The morning passed in a steady rhythm of guests checking out. Linen stripped and washed. A new arrival from the stage. Ada kept her head down and her answers short. Just after noon, the door opened and Silas Rourke walked in. He had cleaned up since dawn, his hair still damp, his coat brushed free of ash. He stopped when he saw her behind the desk. "Miss McCrae." "Mr. Rourke." He crossed to the desk and set a small cloth-wrapped bundle on the polished wood. "You left this." She stared at the bundle. "I did not bring anything except my bag." He unwrapped the cloth. Inside was the tin cup she had used for coffee. "You set it down when you left. Thought you might want it back." She felt heat climb her neck. "That is your cup." He shrugged. "You held it long enough. Might as well keep it." Before she could argue, the door opened again, and 3 men walked in. Ada recognized 2 of them. Carlton Hayes, who owned the bank and half the land around Dust Hollow, and Patrick Drum, who owned the other half and wanted the rest. The third man she did not know, but he had the look of someone who carried a gun for pay. Hayes smiled, all teeth and cold charm. "Miss McCrae, Mr. Rourke." Silas turned slowly, his body angled between Ada and the men. "Hayes." Hayes gestured to the stranger. "This is Mr. Voss. He represents certain interests in the water rights dispute currently before the county." Ada kept her face blank, but her pulse kicked up. The water rights dispute was the polite name for the fight that had been tearing Dust Hollow apart for 6 months. Carlton Hayes claimed the creek that fed the town belonged to his land by old survey. Patrick Drum claimed it belonged to the valley by common use. Whoever won controlled the water. Whoever controlled the water controlled everything. Voss looked at Silas with the flat appraisal of a man measuring another for a coffin. "I hear you used to ride with the Kern brothers." Silas did not blink. "I hear a lot of things. Most of them are lies." Voss smiled without warmth. "Funny. I heard you were good with a gun. Good enough that some folks might pay to keep you on their side." Silas took 1 step forward. "Get out." Hayes raised a hand. "Now, Silas, no need for hostility. Mr. Voss is simply making introductions. We are all neighbors here. We should be able to talk like civilized people." Ada saw the muscle jump in Silas's jaw. He did not look at her, but she felt the warning in every line of his body. Hayes turned his smile on Ada. "Miss McCrae, I trust the hotel is treating you well." "Very well, thank you." "Good, good." Hayes tapped his fingers on the desk. "You know, this hotel sits on land with water access. If the dispute goes the wrong way, that access might become, shall we say, complicated. Ada forced her voice to stay level. I am only the keeper. I do not own the property. True. But the owner is an old man in Santa Fe who has not visited in 5 years. If something were to happen, if the property were to become available, well, a smart woman might see an opportunity. Or a threat. Silas moved again, just a half step. But Voss's hand drifted toward his belt. Hayes laughed lightly. Gentlemen, please, Miss McCrae, forgive the interruption. We will leave you to your work. He tipped his hat and walked out, Voss and Drum following. The door closed. Silas turned to Ada. You need to stay out of this. She met his eyes. I am not in it. You are now. Hayes does not make social calls. He came here to see how you react. And what did he see? Silas leaned on the desk, his voice dropping. He saw a woman alone in a town that is about to tear itself apart. If you are smart, you will leave before it does. Ada straightened her shoulders. I have been leaving all my life. I am done. Then, you had better learn to fight. He pushed off the desk and walked out, leaving the tin cup on the counter. That night, Ada lay in her narrow bed and listened to the town settle into silence. She thought about Silas's warning and Hayes's smile and the letter hidden in her bag. She thought about the name she had left behind and the woman she was trying to become. Sleep finally came, shallow and restless. 3 days later, the foreclosure notice went up on the wall outside the land office. The bank was calling in the loans on 4 properties, including the Crescent Ranch, a small cattle operation north of town that had been struggling since the drought 2 summers back. The ranch owner was a widow named Beatrice Kern. She was 63 years old, and she had 2 grown sons, both of whom had ridden with Silas Rourke a decade ago. Ada heard about the foreclosure from Mary Talbot, who heard it from the preacher's wife, who heard it from the postmaster. By noon, the whole town knew. By supper, the ranch hands were drinking hard at the saloon and talking about writing to the bank. Ada stayed late at the desk, recording payments and balancing the books. She heard the commotion from the street, raised voices and the sound of breaking glass. She locked the cash box and went to the window. A crowd had gathered outside the saloon. She saw Silas in the center, his hand on the shoulder of a younger man who was shouting at Carlton Hayes. Hayes stood on the boardwalk with Voss at his side, unmoved. Ada grabbed her shawl and went out. By the time she reached the crowd, Silas had pulled the young ranch hand back and put himself between the man and Voss. The hand was Sam Kern, Beatrice's youngest. His face was red and his fists were clenched. You are stealing her land, Sam shouted. She paid every month until the drought. 1 bad year and you take everything. Hayes folded his arms. The terms of the loan were clear. She had 90 days to make the payment. She did not. The land reverts to the bank. That is the law. Sam lunged. Silas caught him and shoved him back hard. Do not, Silas said quietly. He will kill you and call it self-defense. Voss smiled. Ada felt something cold settle in her chest. She stepped forward. How much does she owe? Hayes turned, his eyebrows lifting. Miss McCrae, this does not concern you. I asked how much. Hayes glanced at Voss, then back at Ada. $1,200. The crowd went still. Ada felt the weight of every eye on her. $1,200 was more than most families in Dust Hollow saw in 3 years. It was a fortune. It was impossible. She met Hayes's gaze and kept her voice steady. If someone were to pay it, the foreclosure would be voided. Hayes smiled slowly. If someone were to pay it before the deadline, yes. The deadline is Friday, at noon. Today was Wednesday. Ada nodded and turned away. Silas caught her arm as she passed. What are you doing? She pulled free. What you told me to. Learning to fight. Ada walked back to the hotel and climbed the stairs to her room. She pulled the travel bag from under the bed and opened it. Beneath the dresses and the tin with her mother's ring, wrapped in a square of oilcloth, was the money. $1,400 in bills, saved over 5 years from a job she had not wanted, and a man she had not loved. She had taken it the night she left, telling herself it was payment for time stolen and dignity spent. She had told herself she would use it to start fresh, somewhere far away, somewhere no one knew her name or her shame. She counted it twice. $1,400. Enough to save the ranch and keep the town from exploding. Enough to buy trust, maybe. Or at least to prove she belonged to something larger than her own fear. She wrapped the money back in the oilcloth and set it on the narrow table. Then, she sat on the edge of the bed and let herself shake. A knock came at the door. She stood, smoothing her skirt. Come in. Silas pushed the door open. He filled the frame, his hat in his hands. Mary, let me up. Said you look like you might do something stupid. Ada crossed her arms. I am paying the debt. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. With what money? Mine. He looked at her for a long moment. You have been here 2 weeks. You do not have $1,200. She lifted her chin. You do not know what I have. He set his hat on the table and moved closer. I know you are running. I know you are scared. And I know whatever money you have, you did not come by it easy. She felt her throat tighten. That does not matter. It does, if you are throwing it away to save people you do not know. They are your people. He shook his head slowly. I rode with Sam's brothers 10 years ago. I have not spoken to Beatrice Kern since I came back. This is not my fight. Then why did you stop Sam from getting himself killed? He looked away. That is different. No, she said quietly. It is exactly the same. You see someone about to lose everything, and you step in because you know what it costs to lose. He turned back to her, and his eyes were storm dark. What did you lose, Ada? Everything, she whispered. He closed the space between them in 2 strides. His hands came up, hovering near her arms, not quite touching. Who did you run from? She shook her head, tears burning behind her eyes. It does not matter. It does to me. The words hung between them, low and raw. She looked up at him, at the hard lines of his face and the careful way he held himself, like a man who had learned not to reach for things he wanted. I was engaged, she said finally, to a man in Philadelphia. A man with money and position and a need to own everything he touched. I thought I loved him. I thought he would make me safe. But he did not want a wife. He wanted a possession. So I left. I took the money he kept in his office safe, and I ran. Silas did not move. Does he know where you are? I do not think so. but he is looking. The letter said he found my first stop. He will find the next, and the next, until he finds me. Silas's jaw tightened. Let him come. She almost laughed. You do not know him. I do not have to. His hands finally settled on her arms, warm and solid. You are not alone anymore. The words broke something inside her. She swayed forward, and his arms came around her, careful and sure. She pressed her face to his chest and felt the steady hammer of his heart. They stood like that for a long time, the room quiet around them. Finally, Silas pulled back enough to look at her. If you pay that debt, Hayes will know you have money. He will dig. He will find out where it came from. Let him, she said. I am tired of hiding. Then, we do it smart. We do it public. And we do it together. Friday morning came cold and bright. Ada dressed in her best gown, a deep blue wool with black trim that had been her mother's. She pinned her hair up carefully and wrapped the money in a clean cloth. Silas met her at the hotel entrance. He had shaved and brushed his coat, and he looked like a man going to a funeral or a fight. They walked together to the bank. The street was full. Word had spread, and it seemed like half of Dust Hollow had turned out to watch. Ada saw Mary Talbot and the preacher. She saw the Kern brothers standing near the boardwalk, their mother between them, her face carved from old grief and new fear. She saw Patrick Drum and his men on the opposite side, watching with the cold patience of vultures. Carlton Hayes stood at the bank entrance with Voss beside him. He smiled when he saw Ada, Miss McCrae, Mr. Rourke. Punctual as always. Ada stopped in front of him and unwrapped the cloth. $1,200, she said clearly. The full amount owed by Beatrice Kern. I am paying the debt. Hayes took the money and counted it slowly, making a show of each bill. The crowd pressed closer. When he finished, he folded the bills and tucked them into his coat. The debt is satisfied. The foreclosure is voided. A cheer went up from the ranch hands. Beatrice Kern closed her eyes, her sons holding her steady. Hayes looked at Ada with something new in his expression. Calculation mixed with respect. That was generous, Miss McCrae. Where does a hotel keeper come by $1,200? Ada felt Silas shift beside her, but she kept her voice calm. I saved it. From previous employment. Hayes tilted his head. And what employment was that? She met his gaze without flinching. Private service. In Philadelphia. Hayes smiled slowly. Philadelphia. That is a long way to come for hotel work. Dust Hollow suits me. I am sure it does. Hayes glanced at Silas. And I am sure Mr. Rourke has been very welcoming. Silas took a step forward, but Ada put a hand on his arm. We are done here, Mr. Hayes. The debt is paid. The foreclosure is voided. Unless you have further business, we will leave you to your day. Hayes tipped his hat. No further business. For now. Ada turned and walked away, Silas at her side. The crowd parted, and she felt their eyes on her back, curious and cautious. She had just made herself visible in a way she could not undo. She had just painted a target on her own spine. But Beatrice Kern was still standing, and the ranch was still whole, and for the first time in years, Ada felt like she had done something that mattered. That evening, the town held a social at the church hall to celebrate the end of the foreclosure. Ada had not planned to go. She had spent the afternoon fielding questions from guests and deflecting Mary Talbot's pointed curiosity. But Silas came to the hotel just before sunset and asked her to walk with him. She changed into a lighter dress, cream cotton with green ribbon trim, and let him lead her down the street. The church hall was strung with paper lanterns and full of music. A fiddler played on a low platform, and couples turned in slow circles on the swept floor. Beatrice Kern saw them enter and cross the room, her hands outstretched. Miss McCrae. She took Ada's hands in hers, her grip strong despite her age. I do not have words. Ada shook her head. You do not need them. Beatrice looked at Silas. You found a good woman, Silas Rourke. Do not let her go. Silas's expression softened. No, ma'am. I do not intend to. Beatrice squeezed Ada's hands once more and returned to her son's. The fiddler struck up a new tune, something bright and quick. Silas turned to Ada. Dance with me. She blinked. I have not danced in years. Neither have I. They will forgive us if we step on each other. He offered his hand, and she took it. They moved onto the floor, and he pulled her close, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. He was not graceful, but he was steady, and she found herself following his lead without thinking. They turned in a slow circle, the music washing over them. Ada looked up at him. Why did you come back to Dust Hollow? He met her eyes. I grew up here. Left when I was 17. Rode with the wrong men. Did things I cannot undo. When I finally walked away, I did not have anywhere else to go. So I came home. And they let you stay. Some did. Some still cross the street when they see me. But I do my work, and I keep my head down. And that is enough. She heard the echo of her own life in his words. Do you regret it? Coming back. He was quiet for a moment. I used to. Not anymore. Why not? He looked down at her, and the guarded lines of his face eased. Because you are here. The words hit her low and deep. She stumbled, and he caught her, pulling her closer. The music swelled, and the lanterns swayed, and for one suspended moment, Ada let herself believe that this could be real, that she could stay, that the past would not find her. Then the door opened, and a man in a long coat stepped into the hall. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and a face Ada knew too well. Her breath stopped. Silas felt her freeze. What is wrong? The man scanned the room, his gaze moving over the dancers. Ada turned her face into Silas's shoulder. We have to leave. Now. Silas did not argue. He steered her toward the side door, moving fast, but not running. They slipped out into the night, and Ada pulled him into the shadows beside the church. Who is that? Silas asked quietly. His name is Jacob Lyle. He works for my former fiancé. He is a finder. If he is here, it means they know where I am. They stayed in the shadows until Jacob Lyle left the hall and walked toward the hotel. Silas watched him go, his body tense as a drawn bow. He will check the hotel first. You cannot go back there. I have to. My things. He turned to her. What things matter more than your life? She thought of her mother's ring, the only piece of home she had left. But Silas was right. Things could be replaced. Life could not. Where can I go? She asked. My forge. It is not much, but it is off the main street and he will not think to look there. Not tonight. They moved through the alleys, keeping to the dark spaces between buildings. The forge was cold and silent. Silas lit a single lantern and barred the door. Ada sank onto the rough chair and wrapped her arms around herself. How did he find me? Silas crouched in front of her. Does it matter? Yes. No, I do not know. She pressed her hands to her face. I thought I had more time. He reached up and gently pulled her hands away. Look at me. She met his eyes. You are not going back to him. I know. Do you? Because you are shaking like you think he already owns you. She felt tears spill over. He did own me. For 5 years I let him tell me who I was and what I was worth. And when I finally walked away, I took his money because I thought that made it fair. But it does not. It just makes me a thief. Silas shook his head. You took what you earned. That is not theft. The law will not see it that way. Then we do not let it get to the law. He stood and pulled her to her feet. Listen to me. You are not alone. You are not helpless. And you are sure as hell not going back to Philadelphia in chains. What are you saying? I am saying, we fight. We find out what Lyle wants, and we make it cost more than it is worth. She searched his face. Why are you doing this? His hand came up to cup her cheek, rough and warm. Because I know what it is like to be owned by your past. And I know what it is like to find someone who makes you want to be free. She leaned into his palm, her eyes closing. When she opened them again, he was closer, his breath warm on her lips. If I kiss you, he said quietly, it means I am in this, all the way, no matter what comes. She reached up and pulled his mouth down to hers. The kiss was slow and fierce, tasting of desperation and hope. His arms came around her, and she pressed into him, needing the solid weight of him, the promise that she was not alone. When they finally broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. We will figure this out. Together. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They stood wrapped in each other, while the lantern burned low, and the night deepened around them. Morning came too soon. Ada woke curled on the floor near the forge, wrapped in Silas's coat with his arm around her shoulders. He was already awake, watching the door. She sat up. What do we do? He handed her a cup of water from the barrel. We go talk to Lyle. She stared at him. That is your plan. Walk up to the man hunting me and have a conversation. He stood and pulled on his vest. If he wanted you dead, you would be dead. He wants you back in Philadelphia, which means he has orders to bring you in alive. That gives us room. Room for what? Negotiation. She shook her head. You do not negotiate with men like Jacob Lyle. You run or you die. Silas pulled her to her feet. Or you stand and make them blink first. They walked to the hotel together in the early light. Jacob Lyle sat in the lobby, reading a newspaper. He looked up when they entered, his eyes moving from Ada to Silas and back. Miss Monroe. Or is it Miss McCrae now? Ada felt her stomach turn, but she kept her voice steady. What do you want, Jacob? He folded the paper and set it aside. Mr. Harlan wants his money back, and he wants you to come home and explain why you thought you could steal from him. I did not steal. I took payment for 5 years of my life. He smiled without warmth. The law will not see it that way. Silas stepped forward. How much does he want? Lyle looked at him with mild interest. And you are someone who is asking a question. Answer it. Lyle leaned back in the chair. Mr. Harlan wants $1,400, and Miss Monroe's returned to Philadelphia to face charges. If she complies, he will consider the matter settled. If she does not, I have a federal warrant in my pocket and a train ticket with her name on it. Ada felt the walls closing in. Silas did not move. She does not have $1,400 anymore. She spent $1,200 of it saving a ranch. Lyle raised an eyebrow. How generous. Then she can return the remaining $200 and come with me to discuss terms with Mr. Harlan directly. No, Silas said flatly. Lyle stood slowly. I do not think you understand the situation. I have the law on my side. I have a warrant, and I have a train leaving in 2 hours. Miss Monroe will be on it, with or without her cooperation. Silas smiled, cold and sharp. And I have a town full of people who just watched her save a woman from foreclosure. You try to drag her out of here in chains, and you will have a fight you cannot win. Lyle studied him for a long moment. You are bluffing. Try me. The silence stretched. Finally, Lyle reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. This is a federal warrant. It supersedes local sentiment. Silas took the paper and read it slowly. Then he handed it back. This warrant is for Margaret Monroe, resident of Philadelphia, on charges of theft. Ada McCrae is a resident of Dust Hollow, New Mexico Territory, employed as a hotel keeper. Unless you can prove they are the same person, you have nothing. Lyle's eyes narrowed. I can prove it. Then do it, in front of a territorial judge. File your charges. Bring your evidence. Until then, Miss McCrae stays here. Lyle looked at Ada. Is that what you want? To hide behind him and hope I go away? Ada stepped forward. I want you to tell Edward Harlan that I do not belong to him. I never did. And if he wants his money, he can come ask for it himself. Lyle smiled slowly. He thought you might say that. He also thought you might have found something worth protecting here. He looked at Silas. Be careful, Mr. Rourke. Men who get between Edward Harlan and what he wants tend to have accidents. Silas did not blink. I have had worse than Edward Harlan looking for me. Tell him to bring his best. Lyle tipped his hat. I will be in touch. He walked out, and the door swung closed behind him. Ada waited until Lyle was out of sight, then turned to Silas. He will be back. I know. With more men. Probably. She crossed her arms. You should not have done that. You should not have put yourself between me and a federal warrant. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. Would you rather I let him take you? She felt her throat tighten. No. But I do not want you hurt because of me. Too late. I am already in. She wanted to argue, but the truth was, she did not want him to step back. She wanted him exactly where he was, solid and unmovable, standing between her and the past. Mary Talbot appeared from the kitchen, her eyes sharp. That man who was just here. He is trouble. Ada nodded. He is. Mary looked between them. You need help. We might, Silas said. Mary wiped her hands on her apron. Then you have it. This town owes Miss McCrae. And I do not forget debts. She disappeared back into the kitchen. Ada looked at Silas. What do we do now? Now, he said quietly, we get ready. Because Lyle is not the kind to give up, and neither is the man who sent him. That afternoon, Ada moved her things from the hotel to a small room behind the forge. It was not much, just a cot and a shelf, and a window that looked out on the alley. But it felt safer than the hotel, and she could not shake the feeling that Lyle was watching. Silas spent the day working, shaping iron with steady precision, while Ada sat in the corner and sewed a torn him. They did not talk much. They did not need to. The silence between them was comfortable, built on shared fear and fragile trust. Just before sunset, Beatrice Kern came to the forge with a basket of food. She set it on the workbench and looked at Ada. I heard what happened this morning. The whole town heard. Ada felt heat climb her neck. I am sorry. I did not mean to bring trouble. Beatrice waved a hand. Trouble comes whether you invite it or not. The question is what you do when it arrives. She looked at Silas. You are doing the right thing. Silas set down his hammer. I am doing the only thing. Beatrice smiled. That is what I said. The right thing. She turned back to Ada. My sons want to help. They owe you. And they owe Silas for pulling them back before they did something stupid. Tell them thank you, Ada said. But I do not want anyone getting hurt. Beatrice's expression turned fierce. Too late for that, girl. You saved my ranch. You stood up to Carlton Hayes, and you handed over everything you had to keep us whole. That makes you family. And family does not stand alone. She left before Ada could argue. Silas picked up the basket and handed Ada a cloth-wrapped bundle. Eat. You have not had anything since yesterday. She unwrapped the bundle. Inside was fresh bread and cold chicken and a slice of berry pie. She ate slowly, and Silas sat beside her, their shoulders touching. When the food was gone, she leaned her head against his arm. What if he comes back with a judge? Then we prove you are Ada McCrae, not Margaret Monroe. How? Silas was quiet for a moment. We get you documented. We file papers with the territory. We make Ada McCrae as real as we can, so Margaret Monroe is nothing but a name on a warrant. She closed her eyes. That feels like lying. It is surviving. There is a difference. She was not sure there was. But she was too tired to argue, and the weight of his arm around her shoulders was the only thing keeping her upright. The next 2 days passed in wary quiet. Lyle did not return, but Ada felt his presence like a shadow. She kept to the forge and helped Silas with small tasks, learning the rhythm of his work. On the 3rd day, Carlton Hayes came to call. He stood in the doorway of the forge, blocking the light. Mr. Rourke. Miss McCrae. Silas set down the tongs. Hayes. Hayes stepped inside, his hands clasped behind his back. I hear you have been having trouble with a federal investigator. Word travels, Silas said flatly. Hayes smiled. It does. Especially when the investigator in question is asking the bank about recent large transactions. Ada felt ice slide down her spine. What did you tell him? Hayes looked at her. I told him the truth. That you paid a debt on behalf of a local resident. that the money appeared legitimate, and that I had no reason to question its origin. She stared at him. Why? Hayes tilted his head. Because you cost me a foreclosure, Miss McCrae. And because I respect audacity. You walked into my bank with more money than most people in this territory see in a lifetime, and you handed it over to save a woman you barely knew. That takes courage. Or stupidity. Or both. He turned to Silas. However, audacity does not pay bills, and I suspect Mr. Lyle will return with more resources and less patience. If that happens, Miss McCrae will need friends. Silas crossed his arms. What are you offering? Hayes smiled. Information. And possibly assistance. For a price. Ada stepped forward. What price? Hayes looked at her for a long moment. The water rights dispute goes before the territorial judge next month. Patrick Drum has been buying influence. If he wins, he will control the creek and every ranch that depends on it. I would prefer that not happen. You want me to testify? Ada said slowly. Hayes shook his head. I want you to disappear. Publicly. If the town believes you left because of Lyle, they will be angry. Angry people are useful. And if Drum is distracted by a town on the edge of riot, he will have less time to bribe judges. Silas took a step toward Hayes. You want to use her as bait? Hayes met his gaze calmly. I want to use the situation to my advantage. Miss McCrae benefits because Lyle will believe she ran. You benefit because it buys time. And I benefit because Drum loses focus. Everyone wins. Except the people who get hurt when the town explodes. Ada said. Hayes shrugged. People were going to get hurt anyway. At least this way you control the narrative. Silas looked at Ada. Your choice. She thought about Lyle's cold eyes and Edward Harlan's need to own everything he touched. She thought about the ranch and Beatrice Kern and the way the town had gathered to watch her pay the debt. She thought about Silas, steady and unmovable, asking her to trust him. If I do this, she said slowly, I need your word that you will not foreclose on anyone else while the dispute is active. Hayes raised an eyebrow. That is a significant concession. That is the price. Hayes considered. Then nodded. Done. Where will I go? Ada asked. Silas answered before Hayes could. The Crescent Ranch. Beatrice has room, and the Kern brothers know how to handle trouble. Hayes smiled. Convenient. I will spread the word that Miss McCrae left town this morning on the northern stage. Mr. Lyle will hear it by noon. He tipped his hat and walked out. Ada looked at Silas. Do you trust him? No. But he is right. This buys us time. And time is what we need. They left for the ranch that night, traveling in the dark with Silas driving a borrowed wagon. The road was rough and the air was cold. But Ada felt something loosen in her chest as the town fell away behind them. The Crescent Ranch sat in a shallow valley, with hills rising on three sides. The main house was low and solid, built from adobe and wood, with a wide porch and a roof that had been patched a dozen times. Beatrice met them at the door, a rifle in one hand and a lantern in the other. About time, she said. Come in before you freeze. The house was warm and smelled like coffee and wood smoke. Beatrice led Ada to a small room off the kitchen and set the lantern on a table. You will be safe here. My sons are good men, and they know how to keep their mouths shut. Ada set her bag on the narrow bed. Thank you. Beatrice squeezed her shoulder. Thanks, Silas. He is the one who asked. She left, and Ada sank onto the bed. A moment later, Silas appeared in the doorway. You all right? She nodded, tired. He stepped inside and crouched in front of her. This will not last forever. We will figure it out. She reached out and touched his face, tracing the hard line of his jaw. What if we do not? Then we run. Together. She felt tears prick her eyes. You would do that. Leave everything. He turned his head and kissed her palm. I already did. Once. For the wrong reasons. I would do it again for the right ones. She pulled him up and kissed him, slow and deep. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. I have to go back to town. If I stay gone too long, people will notice. Come back soon. I will. He kissed her once more and left. Ada lay down on the bed and listened to the sound of the wagon pulling away. For the first time in weeks, she let herself hope. Ada spent 5 days at the ranch. She helped Beatrice with the cooking and mending, and she learned the names of the ranch hands and the rhythms of the work. The Kern brothers, Jesse and Sam, treated her with careful respect, and she understood that Silas had told them enough to make her safety their priority. On the 6th day, Silas returned with news. Lyle left town this morning. He told the postmaster he was going back to Philadelphia to consult with his employer. Ada felt relief and dread in equal measure. Does that mean it is over? Silas shook his head. It means he is regrouping. He will be back. With what? More men, more warrants, maybe a federal marshal. We bought time, not freedom. She looked out the window at the hills, brown and endless. How much time? A month, maybe less. Then we use it. The water rights hearing is in 3 weeks. If Hayes wins, he will owe us. If Drum wins, the town will tear itself apart, and no one will care about a woman with a false name. Either way, we have a window. She turned back to him. And if Lyle comes back before then we fight. She crossed the room and took his hands. I do not want you to fight my battles. He pulled her close. Too bad. They are mine now, too. The weeks passed in a strange suspension. Ada stayed at the ranch, and Silas visited when he could, always careful, always watching the road. The town simmered with tension as the hearing approached. Hayes and Drum circled each other like wolves, and the people of Dust Hollow chose sides, or tried to stay neutral. 3 days before the hearing, Silas came to the ranch in the middle of the night. Ada woke to the sound of his voice in the front room, low and urgent. She pulled on a shawl and came out. Beatrice stood by the fire, her face tight. Silas turned when he saw Ada. We have a problem. Lyle is back, and he brought a federal marshal. Ada felt the floor tilt. When? They rode in this afternoon. The marshal has a new warrant, signed by a territorial judge. It names you as Margaret Monroe, wanted for theft. They are planning to search the town tomorrow. If they come here, Beatrice said quietly, I will not let them take her. Silas shook his head. If you resist a federal marshal, they will burn this place to the ground. We have to move her. Where? Ada asked. Silas met her eyes. The only place they will not look. The church. She stared at him, You want me to hide in a church? He almost smiled. I want you to interrupt a wedding. Tomorrow is the hearing. The judge will be in town. Half the territory will be watching. If you walk into that church in the middle of the chaos and claim sanctuary, they cannot touch you without causing a scene. And scenes are exactly what we need. Ada shook her head. That is insane. Probably. But it will work. Beatrice looked between them. What wedding? Silas turned to her. Ours. The next morning, Ada dressed in her best gown, the deep blue wool, and Beatrice pinned her hair up with careful hands. You are sure about this? Beatrice asked quietly. No, Ada said. But I am doing it anyway. Beatrice smiled. That is how you know it matters. They rode to town in the wagon, Silas driving, and Jesse and Sam flanking them on horseback. The streets were full. The hearing was set for noon, and it seemed like everyone in Dust Hollow had come to watch. Ada kept her head down and her shawl pulled close. They went to the church through the back door, and the preacher met them in the small vestry. Silas had spoken to him the night before, and the old man's eyes were kind, but worried. This is irregular, he said. Very, Silas agreed. But legal. The preacher nodded slowly. If you are both willing, I will perform the ceremony. But you understand that once it is done, it cannot be easily undone. I understand, Ada said. She looked at Silas. Do you? He took her hand. I do. The preacher sighed. Then let us begin before I lose my nerve. They stood in front of the small altar, just the four of them, Beatrice and the preacher and Ada and Silas. The words were simple and old, and Ada felt them settle into her bones like truth. Do you, Silas Rourke, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Adam McCrae, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? She met Silas's eyes and saw the future there, uncertain and fierce. I do. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Silas kissed her, slow and sure, and Ada felt the world narrow to the warmth of his mouth and the solid weight of his hands on her waist. A shout rose from outside, and the preacher moved to the window. The marshal is at the hotel. They are searching the rooms. Silas pulled back and looked at Ada. Ready? She nodded. Let us go make a scene. They walked out the front door of the church and into the crowded street. The marshal stood on the hotel porch with Lyle beside him, both men scanning the crowd. Ada took a breath and stepped forward. I am here. The crowd turned. The marshal's eyes narrowed. Margaret Monroe. Ada lifted her chin. My name is Ada Rourke. I was married 10 minutes ago in the church behind me. The marshal looked at Silas. That does not change the warrant. Silas put his arm around Ada. It changes jurisdiction. She is a married woman. Under territorial law, her property and debts transfer to her husband. If you want to charge her with theft, you charge me. Lyle stepped forward. That is not how this works. The marshal raised a hand. Actually, it might be. He looked at Ada. You claim you took money that belonged to your former employer. She nodded. I took payment for 5 years of unpaid labor. He held me under contract with promises he never intended to keep. When I left, I took what I was owed. The marshal glanced at Lyle. Do you have proof of theft? Lyle pulled out a folded document. I have a signed statement from Edward Harlan detailing the missing funds and Miss Monroe's employment terms. The marshal read it slowly. Then he looked at Ada. Do you have proof of your claims? Ada hesitated. Silas squeezed her hand. She does, a voice called from the crowd. Mary Talbot stepped forward, holding a small stack of letters. Miss McCrae, or Miss Monroe, or whatever name she used. She wrote to me 6 months ago, asking about work. In those letters, she described conditions that amount to indentured servitude. I kept them. The marshal took the letters and read. His expression did not change, but something shifted in his posture. This is not a simple theft case. No, Mary said firmly. It is not. The marshal looked at Lyle. I will need to consult with the judge. Until then, miss. He paused. Mrs. Rourke remains free on her own recognizance. Lyle's face darkened. That is not acceptable. The marshal turned to him. That is the law. If you do not like it, take it up with the territory. He tipped his hat to Ada and walked away. Lyle stared at her, his expression cold. This is not over. Silas stepped forward. Yes, it is. Go back to Philadelphia and tell Edward Harlan that Ada McCrae is not coming back. And if he sends anyone else, they will get the same answer. Lyle held his gaze for a long moment. Then he turned and walked toward the stage station. The crowd erupted in cheers. Beatrice pushed through and hugged Ada hard. You did it. Ada looked at Silas. We did it. He smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it reached his eyes. That evening, Ada and Silas returned to the forge. The town was still celebrating, but they slipped away quietly, needing the peace. Inside, Silas lit the lantern and turned to her. Are you all right? She nodded. I think so. He pulled her close. You are married to a blacksmith with a past, a small forge, and a town that will never let you forget you saved them. She smiled against his chest. I can live with that. Good, because I am not letting you go. She looked up at him. Even if Harlan sends someone else. Especially then. She kissed him, and he lifted her off her feet, carrying her to the small room behind the forge. They lay together in the narrow bed, wrapped in each other, and Ada let herself believe that the past was finally past. The hearing happened 2 days later. Carlton Hayes won the water rights by a narrow margin, and Patrick Drum left town swearing revenge. But the town held, and the creek kept flowing, and life in Dust Hollow went on. A month later, the territorial judge dismissed the charges against Ada, citing lack of evidence and jurisdictional complications. The letter came on a Tuesday, and Ada read it twice before she believed it. She walked to the forge and found Silas at the anvil. He looked up when she entered. What is it? She handed him the letter. It is over. He read it slowly, then set it aside and pulled her into his arms. No, he said quietly. It is just starting. She laughed, the sound bright and free. You are right. He kissed her, and the forge glowed warm behind them, steady and enduring. Outside, the sun set over Dust Hollow, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Ada stood in the doorway with Silas's arm around her waist, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she had come home. Not to a place, but to a person. Not to safety, but to something better. To trust without shame. to love without fear, to a future built on fire and hope, and the quiet strength of a man who had seen her at her worst and chosen her anyway. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. Silas pulled her closer. Storm coming. She smiled.